Welcome, this is Sarah Connolly for the Alcohol-Free Lifestyle Podcast. In a previous episode, I presented these 6 fundamental human needs, those being certainty, variety, love and connection, significance, growth, and contribution. In the episode, I discussed how we can meet these needs in low, neutral, or high quality ways, and how many of these needs are met with alcohol, albeit in a low quality and temporary way. But there's no surprise as to why so many people are addicted to alcohol. It meets many of those human needs, and in a society when we are so busy, distracted and occupied, it is the go-to solution to so many of our problems. It's socially acceptable, it's available everywhere, and there doesn't seem to be any real problem with turning to alcohol to meet our needs in the early days of our lives. We don't suffer the negative consequences, and we're just having a good time. As we get older, because we have learnt that alcohol is the way to meet all of our needs, we just keep on drinking, never questioning it. But eventually those negative consequences start to pile up, and oftentimes we are forced into questioning whether alcohol really is the best way to meet our needs. This is where it gets uncomfortable because we've never really learned a different way of meeting these needs, and this generally starts really young. As we grow, we learn the things that we like the most based on what's been made available to us. And alcohol, as we know, is made readily available. So we have these basic human needs. And when we want to meet those needs, especially when we're younger, if they're not being met by primary caregivers or by our environment, we start to look for substitute ways of getting the feelings that we're seeking. Things like alcohol play a really significant role in providing support for us when we are feeling disconnected or we're feeling stressed out. We need some certainty and safety in our lives. So, in other words, when our needs are not being met and we feel a sense of emptiness, we are wired to grasp for the most obvious substitute that's going to give us a sense of reward. And we get just enough reward from that substitute to keep us going back for more. As I've mentioned, some of these addictions and substitute behaviours are culturally acceptable. For instance, we might feel the need to get love and respect from people, so we might fixate on accumulating wealth or on workaholism or on getting more power over people. Control and dominance are ways of getting significance, and much like alcohol, can also become highly addictive. Other socially acceptable ways of meeting our needs are things like excessive exercise or dieting, anything that takes us to the extreme, that is condoned by a society that is driven by short-term gratification. When we are addicted to meeting our needs with socially acceptable methods, then we tend not to feel as much pain as if we were turning towards something which was not socially acceptable. These are things like illicit drugs, gambling, violence. So when we are indulging in behaviours that are not socially acceptable, there is not only the suffering of the addiction to it, but there's the added suffering of social condemnation. So when we are addicted to alcohol, up to a point we feel relatively safe because it is socially acceptable. But there comes a point, mainly driven by propaganda from the alcohol industry, where drinking too much alcohol suddenly becomes socially unacceptable. When we reach that point, what we might find is that we start to seek out places where our excessive drinking is seen more as a normal behaviour. So we'll start to find ourselves spending more time with people who will drink as much as us. Because ultimately the fear is that we will be rejected and outcast in some way by our behaviours. We can see that with drugs, illicit drugs, which is completely socially unacceptable, And people who struggle with illicit drugs feel a huge sense of shame and of being marginalised and pushed to the edges of society. But it's no different than alcohol. It's just that alcohol is socially acceptable, so we get away with it for a longer period of time. Once an addiction to any substance or behaviour becomes all-encompassing and starts to control our lives to a greater degree, there is not only the suffering of our own guilt and shame, there's the suffering of condemnation from society. And I believe that this is what holds a lot of people back from actually seeking the help that they need. When it comes to alcohol, there's this big fear that we'll be judged or criticised for our lack of willpower. But it's important for us to understand that it has nothing to do with pure will. Once we are addicted to a substance that is there to meet a real, fundamental and necessary human need, we easily become hooked, and it is incredibly hard to unhook ourselves. When we add in shame, condemnation from society, we just perpetuate the cycle of addiction. The single most crucial part of healing an addiction is removing this condemnation. When we are indulging in a behaviour that we know deep down is bad for us, we add on layers and layers of judgment, that we shouldn't be doing it, that we should be stronger, that we should be less weak, we should have more power, we should have more self-control. All of these thoughts and accompanying feelings lead to us getting deeper into the cycle of addiction. There are many ingredients that are required in order to remove our addiction to alcohol. But one, if not the most important ingredient, is one of self-compassion. Many people really struggle with this idea, the idea of actually being kind to ourselves. Primarily because for most of our lives we've been driven and motivated by our inner critic, the one that tells us that we need to do more, the one that tells us we need to have more, create more, work more. That inner voice that's driving our behaviours and gives us thoughts and feelings that are generally negative and punitive is one of the main reasons why we remain stuck in our cycle of addiction. Self-compassion, however, is anathema to so many of us. We don't know what it feels like or looks like to be kind to ourselves. We are, in fact, more comfortable when we are beating ourselves up. It is, in my experience, the key to starting out on a journey of recovery, one that is grounded in that sense and belief and understanding that we have become addicted based on our basic human needs not being met in a way that was satisfying. Self-compassion is really simply the idea of being kind to yourself in the same way that you would behave towards your best friend. It really does make sense when you think about it that you spend all of your time with yourself. You're the only person that you can rely on 24 hours a day. If that person is relentlessly criticizing you, beating you up, telling you you're not good enough, telling you that you are not enough as a human being, that you're not worthy, then it stands to reason that at some point you are going to break and you are going to look for some relief. So many of our clients tell us that it is that inner voice that they are trying to escape from through their drinking. It is that incessant chatter and criticism. So self-compassion is and should be at the heart of genuine long-term recovery from any kind of addiction. But how do we learn to have more of it? The first piece is to recognize that perhaps we are not speaking to ourselves in a way that is helpful. Now, the challenge here again is that we might notice that we're not being self-compassionate and then decide that we're going to beat ourselves up about that. We are quite interesting creatures in that way. So noticing without judgment is the first step. Noticing when that inner critic starts to fire up with its incessant chatter and just being aware of what it's saying. Then it's important to be mindful not to get hooked in. We have a tendency to get really hooked by our thoughts and to start to feel like our mind has something really important to tell us. If we can cultivate the ability to step back and just notice that this is what's going on for us and that it's not helpful, we can create a separation between those thoughts and who we actually are behind those thoughts. So noticing and observing is the first part. This is the first step as identified by Dr. Kristen Neff, who's done a huge amount of research into self-compassion and the power of it. The first step is mindfulness, paying attention, being mindful of when you're criticizing yourself. The second step is common humanity. That is to notice the thoughts and then recognize and accept that these are a completely natural part of being human, that everybody does it, everybody feels this way from time to time, and that you are definitely not alone. When we're stuck in the cycle of criticizing ourselves, we're very self-focused and we seem to think that we are the only person in the world that feels this way, which perpetuates feelings of loneliness and isolation and disconnection, which of course are some of the greatest catalysts for us turning to alcohol to relieve those feelings. So the first step, mindfulness. The second step is common humanity, knowing that you are not alone. The last step is self-kindness. Now this is where many people can struggle. As I said earlier, we're not used to speaking to ourselves in a kind way. And in fact, inner criticism and criticizing ourselves can be in and of itself a kind of addiction. We perhaps believe that by beating ourselves up, at some point we might be so aggressive and assertive that we'll force ourselves into change. But as we know, anyone who is forced into something may succeed for a period of time, but it's filled with resentment, pushback, anxiety, and stress. And it doesn't really have any long-term success. So rather than forcing yourself to change, how about looking at yourself as you would a dear friend who wanted to create change? How would you speak to that person? Would you yell at them? Would you criticize them? Would you tell them they're a failure, a loser, they're never going to succeed? Interesting, probably not. But the chances are that you may well likely be talking to yourself in this way. So step back, notice the thoughts, and then ask yourself, what would I say if my best friend was sharing this challenge with me? You might find that you'd be speaking to a friend in a very, very different way. Different words, different tone, different pace. See if you could notice all of these things. What would you say? When we practice being mindful, we become aware of our thoughts on a moment-to-moment basis. And when we're mindful, we have a clear and balanced view as opposed to one that is clouded by self-criticism. We allow our thoughts and emotions to enter our awareness without judgment, avoidance, or resistance. Mindfulness is an essential part of self-compassion because we need to be able to turn towards our feelings instead of away from them. We need to learn to stop trying to avoid how we feel by numbing with alcohol or other distractions so that we can acknowledge and accept that we are in some way suffering. If we keep rejecting these feelings and telling ourselves that these feelings are bad and negative, we will consistently be looking outside of ourselves for some solution. And normally we look for the quickest, fastest way to feel better. As I've mentioned, there are many, many ways that we can meet this need to find some kind of certainty and comfort. But alcohol and other drugs and excessive activities like overworking or dieting or whatever it might be are low quality ways of meeting those needs. While it might seem totally obvious that we are suffering and in pain. Many of us refuse to acknowledge and accept how much pain we're actually experiencing, especially when that pain and discomfort comes from our own inner critic. When we're confronted with challenges in life, we also get so caught up in trying to solve the problems that we don't stop and take our time to consider and accept that we are facing a challenge and that we need to apply some level of self-compassion that will allow us to look at that challenge through a clearer lens. So as we become more mindful of our experiences, we prevent ourselves from getting totally absorbed and identified with the thoughts and feelings as they're coming up. We are able to, in a way, step back and create a space between our thoughts and who we are behind those thoughts. Mindfulness will really help. The practice of mindfulness, the practice of being aware, will really help the tendency that we have to run away from our feelings. We need to learn how to be with those feelings, because when we realize over time that those feelings actually don't last very long. In fact, science tells us that an emotion lasts between 90 seconds and 2.5 minutes if we allow it simply to be and pass through us. The problem, as I said earlier, is that we experience a negative emotion, we notice it, we panic, and then we create another negative emotion. So we go from anger to fear to guilt to shame, and we're extending that period of time that we're feeling uncomfortable. With the practice of mindfulness, we can allow ourselves to feel angry and be with that anger. And you will notice over the course of a few minutes that feeling will dissipate. But we need to be conscious of it, and we need to be able to be present with it. As we become more mindful, we start to learn to apply self-compassion. Mindfulness is the first step that we need to take. We need to be awake and aware so that we can start to learn new responses to this suffering.
Hey, James here. Just a short interruption to share with you some of the results that folks have been getting inside of our 90-day stop drinking process. This is Jessica Gaines-Jarbo from Kentucky. She says, I've now got joy, focus, presence, clarity. This is Glenn Granger from Massachusetts. I'm more patient. This is Jenny Unglis from Northern Ireland. I discovered strength I didn't know I had. This is Doug Rice from Texas. I have unbelievable clarity. This is George Bird from New York. I'm calmer. And this is Russell Belcher from Australia. My health has improved. I've lost 20 pounds, says John Keltner in California. If you would like to create these type of results, then you are welcome to apply to be part of our 90-day stop drinking process, which is called Project 90. The link is in the show notes. You can go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/Project 90. Back to the show.
Immediately after we do something that we feel regretful about, instead of automatically reacting by criticizing ourselves or by downing a bottle of beer or whatever it might be, we pause, we notice, and we pay attention to the emotion. If we allow it to pass, it's just a few moments of discomfort before we start to feel better again, which is much more beneficial and less destructive than going into automatic behaviours, responses, emotional or physical, that will lead us down a path that is way more painful than the short period of time that we might need to endure from the initial emotion. Once we are more mindful, we can then apply the second step of self-compassion, which is self-kindness. We have a tendency to beat ourselves up when we make a mistake, instead of being supportive, understanding, and kind to ourselves. Self-kindness is about applying the same principles of support, connection, and love that you would give to a friend in trouble to yourself. As I've said before, we are the only one that we spend all of our time with. We are the only one that can really step in and soothe ourselves at any moment that we need help. Whilst we have friends that are supportive, You may find that you are agreeing with your friend, but actually deep down you don't believe what they're saying if they're saying something nice about you. So we need to start to learn to be that best friend for ourselves, to really start to understand that in order to heal, we need to apply a sense of love, understanding, lack of judgment towards ourselves, to appreciate that we are in this human experience and that a lot of what we think and feel is beyond our control. We are just simply on autopilot based on old beliefs and patterns of behaviour that we have accumulated over a lifetime. This awareness and acceptance of ourselves just as we are is another key component of freeing ourselves from destructive behaviours. The foundation is one of acceptance, understanding and kindness. I am in this predicament. I'm struggling. I'm suffering. It's okay. It's not my fault. But it is now my responsibility to take the steps necessary in order to bring myself back to a place of peace, calm and self-respect. That is a lot more productive than saying you are a waste of space, you are weak, you are pathetic, there is something wrong with you, you are inherently bad, so you might as well just pick up another drink. The third element of self-compassion is common humanity. Often when we are struggling, we feel like we are the only person in the world to have ever experienced this. We feel like there is something inherently wrong with us, that we are bad, weak, pathetic, that we are not as good as other people. We go into comparison. We look at other people and see and make up stories about how wonderful they are and how terrible we are. All of this contributes to the cycle of returning to destructive behaviour. A sense of interconnectedness with our other human beings around us is crucial to self-compassion. We recognise that all people are flawed. There is no such thing as a perfect human being. And that actually many of the people that we believe are perfect or better than us, we only see a tiny slice of their reality. You would probably find that many people around you are looking at you and thinking that you've got it all together. This is just the nature of us being human. We always feel like other people are doing better than we are. And this is perpetuated by social media and how everybody seems to be having such a wonderful life. So common humanity is getting realistic, getting real about life, getting real about the human condition, that everybody suffers, that everybody has fears and insecurities, and that you are definitely not alone in your tendency to beat yourself up. It's completely normal. Chances are it's something that you'll always do. I know from my own experience that despite many, many years of work on self-compassion, there are still times when I notice myself being incredibly unkind. The difference is that I now have the practice of being able to see it and just gently observe and notice that it's just something that will pass. I don't hook in, I don't identify, I just notice that that's what's going on for me in that moment, and then I apply some self-kindness and common humanity. When we are stuck and isolated and driven by these negative thought patterns, we can fall into the belief that things are supposed to be a certain way, that things are supposed to be different. We notice this quite often when people quit alcohol. There's this belief that it should be easier than it is, or they should be feeling a certain way by now. Again, this is just another way that our brains have of trying to take us back into our comfort zone. It's not working. Something is wrong here. This is again an opportunity for us to bring some mindfulness to our thoughts. We do not know exactly how things are going to turn out in our lives from any given moment, and we make these huge assumptions that we have all these answers in our heads that are right, that if we're not feeling a certain way or if something is not happening the way that we want it to happen, then there is something wrong. But many of these things that we feel we are controlling, we cannot control. We have no control. The only thing that we can control is what's in the present moment and what is going on in our heads. We can at any moment choose to criticize ourselves, but we can also in any given moment choose to stop and say, no, this is not serving me. This is not in my best interest. I'm going to apply some self-compassion here because I know deep down that that is the way forward. That is the way that I'm going to find my freedom. So in summary, we have mindfulness, paying attention, just noticing without judgment how your mind is working. Is it supporting you or is it destroying you? Is it building you up or is it tearing you down? Notice without judgment. The second step, self-kindness. Be kind. Change the dialogue inside. Say something like, it's okay, you're safe, you're okay, we will be okay. You only need to pause for a few moments to apply a sense of peace and calm and self-acceptance. Pause. Don't hook in. Don't get dragged down. And then the third step, recognizing that this is a completely normal and natural part of being human, that others, many others around you are struggling with the same things. If we can consistently apply these steps to our thoughts and behaviours, we'll find with patience and consistency over time that inner dialogue will gently start to change. We need to put in some work here because potentially for a long time you've been beating yourself up. Don't beat yourself up for that. Don't feel guilt or shame for not having done this earlier or for being so terribly bad you must beat yourself up a lot more than other people. I'm sure John doesn't do this. This is how the mind works. Again, step back, pay attention, ask yourself, how can I be kind in this moment? What would I say to my best friend? This is a part of learning how to self-soothe, how to sort out those difficult, uncomfortable feelings that often drive us to drink. I invite you to literally just start to notice what's going on. You have to be quite vigilant because some of these thoughts can be quite sneaky and they've been there for a really long time, so they will keep popping up. Have patience, have a sense of realism. Don't have overly high expectations. Just have the intention. That's enough. The intention to start paying attention and do it with a sense of kindness and compassion towards yourself. You deserve to be kind to yourself. You deserve all the things that you want in life. You deserve to find freedom from an addiction if that's what you're struggling with. You deserve to enjoy and appreciate and value the life that you've been given. Self-compassion is the gateway to finding this. So if you'd like to learn more about self-compassion, I highly recommend the work of Dr. Kristen Neff in relation to self-compassion, along with Tara Brach, who does lots of work in what she calls radical self-compassion. And there's many teachings, talks, meditations around self-compassion on her website. For those of you that are interested in exploring your relationship with alcohol, there are many resources that you can find below this talk. Or you can make a call or speak to one of our coaches to see if the program is right for you. In the meantime, perhaps you can just commit for one day or even for 1 hour that you're going to try and be kind to yourself. See how it feels, see how it lands. Pay attention, don't judge, and try and enjoy being your own best friend. Thanks so much for listening. This is Sarah Connolly, and I look forward to Thank you so much for listening. This is Sarah Connolly for the Alcohol-Free Lifestyle Podcast.
I would be so grateful if you would leave a review. That will help us climb the rankings and get our show exposed to so many more people who could really benefit from the content. You can do that by going into Apple Podcasts, rating the show, writing a little one-sentence summary, and posting it. That would be so amazing. Thank you. Likewise, if you would like to schedule a 15-minute exploratory call and apply for our Project 90 program, then you can do so by going to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/Project 90. If you'd like to get the free guide, that is the Alcohol Freedom Formula Guide, you can go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/guide. Our YouTube channel is at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/YouTube. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at James Swanwick. Thank you so much for listening. We so appreciate you, and we'll catch you on the next one.